Let's begin exactly where the problem lives. Not in listening, not in speaking, but in the space between them. Most English learners believe that listening and speaking are two separate skills. You listen, then you speak. But in real communication, there is no clean line between them. There is a narrow, unstable space, a transition, a moment where sound turns into response. That moment is where English gets stuck. You hear the sentence, you understand it, you even know what you want to say, and yet nothing comes out. Or something comes out late, or something comes out weak, or something comes out broken. This confuses people deeply. They think, I understood everything. Why couldn't I respond? The answer is simple, but uncomfortable. Understanding is not the same as being ready to respond. Now let's slow this down. When someone speaks to you in English, your system does several things at once. It decodes sound, it recognizes words, it constructs meaning, it evaluates relevance, it prepares reaction. All of this happens in milliseconds. But for learners, something extra appears. Interference. That interference lives in the space between listening and speaking. Now, listen carefully. English does not fail because you don't know what to say. It fails because the response channel closes. Why does it close? Because it becomes overloaded. Now, let's talk about overload. Overload happens when too many processes compete for the same moment. While listening, learners often translate, analyze grammar, judge their understanding, predict the next sentence, prepare a perfect answer, monitor pronunciation, and worry about mistakes. This creates traffic, and traffic blocks movement. Now think of the response moment like a doorway. Listening enters through one side, speaking exits through the other. But learners crowd the doorway. They stand there thinking, checking, rehearsing, so nothing moves. Now let's talk about native speakers. Native speakers don't clear the doorway. They let things pass through unfinished. They respond before the idea is complete. They interrupt themselves. They correct mid-sentence. They change direction while speaking. Learners don't allow this. They believe a response must be finished before it begins. That belief blocks the doorway. Now pause here. Think about how many times you stayed silent because your answer wasn't ready. That silence wasn't a lack of English. It was a closed channel. Now let's talk about channels. Listening and speaking share resources. If listening is heavy, speaking becomes light. If listening is relaxed, speaking opens. This is why learners often speak better when they stop listening carefully. It sounds paradoxical, but it's mechanical. When you reduce listening effort, you free response capacity. Now let's talk about effort again. Effort in listening feels responsible, but excessive effort blocks transition. Listening must be open, not tight. Now let's talk about tight listening. Tight listening focuses on accuracy. Loose listening focuses on movement. Loose listening feeds speaking. Now let's talk about shadowing again, but from this angle. Shadowing removes the transition problem. There is no decision, no preparation, no response planning. Sound enters, sound exits. This trains the channel to stay open. Not the words, the channel. That's why shadowing helps speaking even when you don't understand everything. It trains response continuity. Now let's talk about response fear. Many learners fear responding too early. They think, what if I misunderstand? What if I answer wrong? But conversation is not an exam. Misunderstanding is corrected inside interaction. Silence is not. Now let's talk about timing. Timing matters more than correctness. A timely, imperfect response keeps interaction alive. A perfect, late response kills momentum. Native speakers forgive mistakes. They don't forgive absence. Now let's talk about absence. Absence feels heavy in conversation. It creates pressure. It draws attention. It increases self-awareness. Once attention turns inward, speech collapses. Now let's talk about internal attention. The moment you turn inward to monitor yourself, you leave the conversation. Speech requires outward orientation, toward the other person, toward the situation, toward what is happening. Now think carefully. When English flows, where is your attention? Not on English, not on yourself, on the moment. That's the condition speaking needs. Now let's talk about the illusion of preparation. Learners believe preparation creates fluency. It doesn't. Preparation delays entry. Fluency comes from early entry and later correction. Now let's talk about correction. Correction works best during speech, not before. Before speech, correction becomes suppression. During speech, correction becomes adjustment. This is a massive difference. Now let's talk about adjustment. Adjustment requires movement. No movement, no adjustment. That's why silence is the enemy of fluency, not mistakes. Now let's talk about emotional weight. The longer you wait to respond, the heavier the response becomes. Silence adds importance. Importance adds pressure. Pressure closes the channel. This loop explains so many blocks. Now let's slow this again. Notice how often English fails, not because you don't know the answer, but because you waited too long. Now let's talk about training the transition. You don't train it by answering better. You train it by answering sooner. Sooner does not mean faster speech. It means earlier entry. You can enter with, well, I think, maybe, yeah. These are not weak. They are bridges. They keep the channel open. Now let's talk about bridges. Bridges allow unfinished ideas to cross. Learners want finished ideas. Fluent speakers use bridges. Now let's talk about confidence. Confidence is not knowing what to say. Confidence is trusting that something will come after you start. That trust grows only through experience. Now let's talk about experience. Every time you respond early and survive, your system learns safety. Safety keeps the channel open. Now let's talk about the final shift. One day, you stop waiting for clarity. You respond while clarity is forming. And suddenly, English feels available. Not perfect, available. Availability is fluency. Now let's end here. Not with instruction, not with advice, with awareness. If English gets stuck, look at the space between listening and speaking. That's where everything happens.